Hi, this is Jack Sholder. I am the director of Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, as well as The Hidden, Alone in the Dark, 1201, and many other films. And you are listening to Elm Street Radio.
You've got the body and I've got the brain. I feel like I say that a lot, or at least I have other people say that a lot in reference to Nightmare on Elm Street too. In any case, what's up, Elm Street fans? It is Diandra here.
And Paige.
Welcome to this week's episode of Elm Street Radio. We've got a pretty cool guest on today. It seems like Elm Street Radio is getting a lot of Nightmare 2 love. I don't know if it's intentional, if it's accidental, if we're trying to make a point by the fact we want to say Nightmare 2 is awesome, but we've got another Nightmare 2 episode for you here. Our guest today is going to be Jack Sholder, the director of A Nightmare on Elm Street 2. And as we've said in the past, like, we love Nightmare 2 and we think it's a creepy film. And so I'm curious to see, if that was intentional, what Jack's take is on Nightmare 2. Also, Mark Patton, whom we love very much.
Yes, we love Mark so much. It's going to be interesting to see what he has to say. We've seen a couple interviews with him, like the Never Sleep Again documentary and all sorts of stuff. So I'm very interested to get his take on the franchise, on the film itself, and even really on the fandom and what the fans have, the outpouring of love that they've had for this film in recent years.
And they really have. I mean, that's something that you and I have seen, and I posted it in our group, Station KRGR, but Nathan, our friend Nathan, whom we had on once upon a time, you guys might remember, or you've just seen him around. He's like this really well-known artist who does a lot of great Nightmare pieces and a bunch of others. But he said something about Nightmare. I can't even remember what it was. And I just basically said, it seems like people like Nightmare 2 for the dumbest reasons. Like, it's the cool thing to do. People like the films and they're like, I love Freddy. And then people say, Nightmare 2 is not that great because of this, that, and the other thing. And it's just like stupid reasons. For example, maybe, the real world thing. Freddy's coming out into the real world with the pool, but it's like, did you guys not watch the rest of the films? Let's talk about how many times Freddy has been in the real world. And there's some good theories about that, like maybe Freddy's trapped between the dream world and the real world since Nancy pulled him out. I mean, who knows?
Exactly.
Who
I was just going to
really
say
knows?
that.
Yeah.
In the end of the first film, Nancy pulls him out. That's the whole thing. She pulls him out of the dream and into the world. Even in the hospital, she's got the hat and she looks at her mom and she says, I grabbed it off his head in the dream. I pulled something out from my dream. It plays on that border even in the first one. So for the second one, I do agree with you. I feel like people just pick at it to pick just to say they don't like certain things. But in the past couple of years, it's really had a resurgence. A lot of people really love Nightmare 2, and I don't know if it's because of Mark Patton. I know you've talked about this a lot, how he's so involved with the fans and so involved in social media and in the world that I don't know if that has helped fans grow to love it, but I know for you and I, we've always loved it. We've always thought it was one of the scariest films, and I just love that it is getting good reception now.
I know, me too, and we can't wait for Scream Queen Mark Patton's documentary about Nightmare 2, because I think that's going to be really insightful. I mean, there have been a lot of really great pieces of literature or some documentaries of all lengths on A Nightmare on Elm Street, but I think this one is going to be one of those ones that I'm really interested to hear. Like, I am Nancy, of course. I mean, we both love Nancy, but just to get that perspective of the person alone, just seeing it kind of through their eyes, the person who portrayed this character. But looking at Scream Queen, I think it'll have its similarities to I Am Nancy, but I think it's going to be quite different. And knowing the depth of connections that Mark has with a lot of the people who are going to be in it, I'm just really curious to see where it's going to go, and hopefully Nightmare 2 will continue to grow, because it is certainly a very, very well made film, I think, and I know Paige can echo that. Yeah. And if you have something else to say about it, go ahead and fight us. Bring it on. Bring it in the comments. You want to go ahead and leave your comments We're ready for you. Bring it on.
We welcome it. We welcome it. Bring it on. We'll go toe to toe with you.
Yeah. And good luck with that, dudes and gals. But yeah, like we said, we've got Jack Sholder on, who has directed movies like The Hidden, which has Kyle MacLachlan in it, for those of you who maybe haven't seen it before. And he's also got some other films like Arachnid and Alone in the Dark and 1201 and just a bunch of others. So if you're curious to see what else he's done and you want to have a little marathon, check out his IMDb page. But he's certainly most known for his work on A Nightmare on Elm Street too. And, you know, Paige here is a director, and I'm starting to try to get into directing with short films of my own. So, like, Paige, when you are talking to other directors, like, what's going through your mind? What are you, like, thinking about?
Probably, like, I don't know if you think of this as well, but like I tend to like absorb everything they say, because I like to see what their thought process was when they were on set or in pre-production. I'm big on learning. Like, I want to learn and grow so much in this industry. So for me, like, I would say that I probably just want to know their thought process, or if they have any advice to young and up and coming directors. And so for me, like, I there's so much I still have to learn, and I just love listening. Like, I'm a big person who sits there in silence and in awe of, like, a person. So to have him be a director and be on our show, I'm pretty excited. I'm pretty excited to see what he has to say.
What do you think is the burning question that you want to ask him? Is there something that maybe you've been curious about for a while?
Maybe something along the lines of the fandom, or like what happened to Jesse Walsh, like his opinion, because I talk about it all the time, and I've talked about it a couple times on Elm Street Radio about how in Dream Warriors, I feel like the boy who cut his eyelids off is Jesse Walsh. And I know Mark has said that, like, no, that's not him. But for me and some of the other fans, like, I feel like that it's a homage to Jesse. We want it to be. So I'd be interested to hear what he has to say, you know, what he thinks happened to the character of Jesse. What
Yeah.
about you?
Well, for me, I think it might have to do with a point that was brought up during the conversation with Jim and Lee and Bill, is about kind of Nightmare 2's place in the franchise. And I know it's been talked about a lot. Does it feel like a standalone? Is it really meant to be a standalone? Because it ties in so well with the first movie, and then it just kind of drops off. It doesn't feel right, but the tone is still very scary, and there's just something that unifies the first and the second film, and so I'm kind of curious to just kind of pick his brain a little bit with building off of the conversation and some of the points that the guys had made. So I'm looking forward to seeing what he has to say.
That's awesome.
So I guess we should see if Jack is around and start bugging him for some answers to these burning questions that we and even some of our fellow fans have.
I'm excited. Let's head into Dreamland and talk with Jack Sholder.
Please welcome to the show, Jack Sholder. Welcome, Jack.
Yay!
Good to be here.
It is an absolute honor to talk to you. Paige and I are both huge fans of A Nightmare on Elm Street to Freddy's Revenge. I remember it was one of the Elm Street movies that really stood out to me. And in my opinion, and I know Paige and I have talked about this a lot, but it's, to me, the scariest Elm Street out of all of them. It's beautifully shot, magnificently acted, and I just love the way the film flows. I think it's a beautiful work of art, and that's why we are so excited to have you here today.
We're so excited.
Wow.
Like Diandra said, it definitely, for us is the scariest of all of the films. It just has that bone-chilling moments that you want to look away, but you can't look away because it's so scary.
Well, thank you. Thank you. You definitely made my day.
Well, awesome. So I want to know, because to me, there are a lot of breathtaking elements of the film itself. And I know you discussed a lot in Never Sleep Again with the film. So for me, I'm wondering what moments, like when you were on set, maybe the first day, what was your first reaction, and when people started to act in front of the camera, or maybe there was a special effect that stood out to you? Were there any moments that even you as a director were kind of like your mind was blown a little bit and you were wowed by what was going on?
Well, the first day we shot the stuff in the desert that where the bus is sort of careening through the desert.
Right.
I would say the most startling moment for me was, as fans of the movie probably know, New Line did not want to bring back Robert Englund. I mean, they wanted to bring him back, but they didn't want to pay him more money. And his agent was insisting that he get a raise, and they didn't want to pay it. They said, "Oh, they're trying to take advantage of us, and we don't really need him." And I was sort of the new kid on the block because I had come in about 6 weeks before they were going to start shooting the movie. Things were already in motion when I got there, and I said, I think you really should get him back, because I think he's pretty important to this film, because I thought really he was the best thing about the film, and I thought that the best thing that Wes did, aside from the concept, was to hire a real actor to play the boogeyman, as opposed to like a stuntman, who would sort of, pop out and, slice somebody's head off and then, disappear. But here he had created a real character, and he hired the unlikely guy. If you look at what Robert Englund looked like, he didn't look like the sort of person you would cast to be a, kind of the monster. And so the first week they finally hired him, and he was not available the first week because he'd already taken another job, because New Line said that they weren't going to use him, and so he wasn't available until the second week. So the first week I had this guy. I'm not sure if he was a stuntman or an extra. I think he was an extra, but maybe he was a stuntman. Whatever he was just awful. And there's just the final scene where you see Freddy walking out of the fog in the shower, out of the steam in the shower. That was that guy. That was the double. And New Line just thought they were in a and so and I had met Robert once. We never were formally introduced, and I had actually never met him. And then, I don't know, it was maybe a week or two before we were going to start shooting. And for some reason, I went to see a play in L.A. I don't know. I think somebody I knew was involved in it, and so I kind of went to see it, and have no idea why, since I was so busy and so kind of freaked out about how the hell I was going to make this movie. And of all people, Robert happened to be there. And so during the intermission, he and I just started talking like a mile a minute. So for like 10 minutes, we just talked like maniacs. And then the play started back up, and that was it. And the next time I saw him was on the second week, when he showed up on the set, and I think we were shooting the stuff in Kim Meyer's house, the stuff that happens around the party, but inside the house. And so the first scene that Robert did, he just kind of blew me away. He's just such a good actor, and he had just the way he moved, the way when I worked with the extra, I hadn't worked with Robert. and I just knew that he was just terrible. I had to keep telling him, stop acting like a monster. He kept like walking like he was like he was the mummy or something. And I'd say, just walk like a real person. And then as soon as Robert came on, there was just this power that he had because he was such a wonderful actor. He just suddenly brought this power to this character, and so that was probably that moment.
I have to say I completely agree with you about Robert and his portrayal of Freddy. Specifically in Nightmare 2, we get to see a little bit more of Freddy than we did in the original. And when you see Robert on screen, a lot of people aren't like fans of the pool party scene because they claim it breaks the rules. But I always say there were no rules in the second one because you had to create them yourselves because of the first one. It wasn't a franchise already. Right. And so in that scene, though, when he is walking and his shoulders slumped down and he's just staring at the teens, if you watch that without prejudice and just watch it for the film that it is so intense and so terrifying. Yeah. And he's just such an amazing actor to just in a look portray true evil. Did you guys get any like chills or anything on set when you were like watching him in character or any of that stuff?
Well, I mean, after the first day or the first time that I actually saw him working, I kind of knew what to expect, and also he's such a nice guy. I mean, he's very, very high energy person. His mind is just going like 100 miles an hour. Yeah. He kind of thinks very fast and he talks very fast. He's got a lot of ideas, and I mean, he was extremely collaborative. And he was really the expert on this guy. Much more than me. But he was always willing to defer to me. But in his personal demeanor, he was just such a regular guy that, I mean, I just basically, had to lower my head and just go forward. I had very little time to do anything else but try to get this movie made. It was a very difficult assignment.
Now, a couple weeks ago here on Elm Street Radio, we had a celebration of Nightmare 2 now we know a lot of huge Nightmare 2 fans, and 3 of them were on the show. Jim Martin, Lee Howard, and Bill Nugent are those 3 fans, and we were talking about how great Nightmare 2 is, and they happened to make a note that Nightmare 2 feels very similar to the original in its tone, because it's still so scary. And I felt, and I made the point in that episode, that Nightmare 2 connects so well to the first movie. Some people might say Nightmare 2 feels like a standalone, but to me it was such an injustice to not bring up a lot of the events in Nightmare 2, and it really did feel a lot like the original. Was that intentional in the way you were making the film? Did you try to be, or was it just kind of your vision that came to life, or was it kind of its own animal in the sense that it just seemed to fall into place?
Well, the attitude that everybody had about Elm Street 2 is first of all, you have to understand that in 1981, which I guess 1983, I guess is when we shot the film. The idea of sequels was that basically it was a way to kind of exploit the first one and squeeze a little bit more money out. And the head of sales at New Line, who was like a guy who knew every drive-in down the Mississippi River, and smoked a cigar. And, we'll put it on our, and his hope was that we would make 70% of what the original made. So they just wanted to get a title out there called Nightmare on Elm Street 2 that would draw people in who went and saw Elm Street, the original Elm Street. The fact that Wes didn't write the script, the fact that they had David Chaskin, who was an employee at New Line Cinema. I mean, he was not like a screenwriter that they went out and interviewed 50 screenwriters. You know, it was just, oh well, Dave writes screenplays. Let's get him to do it. You know, and he came up with it. And honestly, I don't even know how much he and Wes came up with the story. I mean, obviously with the whole thing with the pool party, which was really, as I understand it, the reason that Wes left the project. And also probably because he thought it wasn't going to be as good as the first one, and he probably had other things to do. But I mean, nobody saw the second one as a masterpiece, and no one saw the first one as a masterpiece. I mean, the people at New Line just thought it was a great concept. I mean, they all thought it was a great concept, and they thought there were some great sequences in it, and I mean, they really believed in the concept, and I don't know that they were. I think they were pleasantly surprised that when it came out, it was the top film that weekend. In fact, I actually remember calling Bob Shea and congratulating him on Monday and said, "Wow, Bob, this is fantastic! Get the top film in the country." And he said, "Well, yeah, I'm not happy with it." And I said, "Bob, shut up! You just got the top film. Stop criticizing the movie." You know, so. You know, and they didn't really know that it was really all about Freddy. You know, if you look at the original poster, there's no Freddy. You know, there's just a claw and you know, Kim and Mark. I'm sitting there staring at it now. So there was no sense of, you know, here's the franchise and you know, this is a sacred thing. We have to be true to. I mean, they honestly didn't care. The only thing that they cared about was they didn't like Robert's makeup in the original, and they wanted to improve the makeup, and so we hired a different guy. I mean, we ended up hiring Kevin Yeager, you know, who was pretty much my choice. I mean, everybody went along with it, but I thought Kevin was a real artist as opposed to just, you know, a blood and gore type of guy. That, I mean, he was a sculptor and a fine artist, and I thought that he just had a really good touch and great taste. So we improved the makeup, and then the only other thing that they told me was keep him dark. You know, we don't want to see him. You know, you've got to keep him dark. You've got to keep him mysterious, and that was pretty much the only thing that they told me. I mean, there was the script, and you know, my job was to shoot the script, and you know, do it as well as I could. And you know, I had done Alone in the Dark for New Line, and I had, you know, done editing work off and on for them forever. And you know, so they knew me very, very well, and they knew what I could do, you know. So as long as everything came out okay, they pretty much left me alone. But Paige actually said something that I don't think anybody who's interviewed me has said, which is that it's kind of its own thing. You know, it wasn't it wasn't trying to be you know, a faithful following of Elm Street 1. You know, it was kind of its own thing. And I mean, there was a hope that there might be an Elm Street 3, but they really didn't know. You know, if it had done what they expected, it would have done 70%, and they probably wouldn't have had an Elm Street 3. So it just kind of was the sequel, but it was kind of looked at as a kind of a one-off. Whereas by the time he got to 3, they knew they had a franchise, you know, and they were pretty sure that there was going to be a 4, you know, and they took it very, very seriously, you know, and wanted to make sure that 3 was, you know, had more stuff in it than 2, and that 4 had more stuff in it than 3. So that was kind of where that was at.
You know, I think that I love every film individually for what it is. And I don't really love one film more than the other. I love the whole genre as a whole. But I do agree with you that, like, in 3 they added more stuff, and then 4 they added more stuff. And I feel like that's why it almost became comical, because it became more mystical, as to where 1 and 2 both were very jarring and real. You know, they didn't have these elaborate mystical deaths of certain things, you know, just for shock value. It was terrifying.
Simple.
You know,
Yeah.
it's simple, exactly. And sometimes that's what works the best on film, and that's why a lot of those are more well received, because the simplicity in it is just scary in itself.
Well, you know, I never set out to be a horror film director. I mean, that was never my favorite genre, or my second favorite genre, or my third favorite genre. You know, I mean, I saw horror films when I was a kid. You know, like I saw a lot of the old creature features. You know, The Mummy and Dracula and all of those things. But you know, I really you know, saw myself as like the next Francois Truffaut, or the next you know, I loved all the great classic films, or, you know, I mean, Hitchcock, and, you know, people like that. And so my big concern has always been character, that having good, believable characters for me was actually the most important stuff. That I figured that the horror stuff would sort of take care of itself, but that if you believed in who the characters were, and if you had sympathy for the characters, that you would then be involved in the film, and you would care about what happened to them. And so that's kind of what I went for. I mean, the reason that I wanted to cast Mark Patton for the role was that I felt that there was a real vulnerability about him that was what I thought the role needed. You know, which he certainly brought to the role, you know, in all sorts of ways, some of which were ways that I hadn't quite anticipated. But I mean, that's kind of what I was going for. The other thing is, you know, I made my living as an editor before I started directing. I think I did Alone in the Dark when I was 34. So from the time I got out of college until then, I was basically working as a film editor. And and one of the things that I did was, New Line used to hire me to do trailers. So they'd pick up a film and it would need a trailer, and they'd hire me. And basically, you know, they had like all the Sonny Chiba Street Fighter movies, and they had all these like crappy Italian horror movies, and you know, ripoffs of other movies, and basically I would take a 100-minute movie and cut it down to 2.5 minutes. So I basically have to take the whole thing apart and then you know, put it together at 1/20th. So I actually got to see how all these things work. So, you know, some of the stuff that was actually pretty good, actually like 5 little shots that you look at it and you think it's like one shot, but it's actually 5 little pieces that sort of comprise this thing that makes you believe that Sonny Chiba hit this guy so hard on the back of his head that his eyes literally popped out of his head, you know. And so I was kind of able to think in that way of like, what are all the little pieces of the jigsaw, you know, like here's the picture of, you know, Freddy coming out of Jesse in his bedroom, you know, and here's all the little pieces of the jigsaw that I have to get in order to put all those little pieces together and have it make that image that you see on the jigsaw. So I think, you know, when you say that the film was well executed, you know, everything was pretty planned out and thought of in that way. So that also may, and things were kind of very logically thought through. So maybe that's part of why you're reacting that way.
We have a couple of fan questions here, actually. We opened the floor to everybody, and we have a lot of good questions that I kind of want to tie into this conversation because they really play well into this. One of the questions is from actually Jim, who was on the show and a couple weeks ago that I'd mentioned earlier. And I know that it was well thought out, and then there was a lot going on, and there was speed involved, and they were trying to get it out after the first nightmare. So, in looking back at it, what, if any, regrets do you have about the making of Nightmare 2? And do you think maybe even the way it turned out plays some role in why it's talked about today?
Actually, no. I mean, I was pretty pleased with how it turned out. I mean, I thought some of the special effects were kind of tacky. I don't know whether how much you know about how the special effects were done, but I was handed a list of I think it was six, 7, 8 single space pages of effects. Almost none of which I had the slightest idea how to do. So I kind of literally had a panic attack, I think, when I saw that. I said, how the hell is this? I'm ever going to get this done? And they said, well, we have this great guy. His name is Dick Albane, and he's a master of special effects. So I met Dick, and Dick is an older gentleman. I mean, he was probably in his 60s, and he'd been the head of special effects at 20th Century Fox, and he was real old school, using monofilament fishing wire to pull things, and he had all these old-fashioned ways of doing things. In fact, I said, well, of all the stuff that you've done, what would you say you're the most proud of? And he thought of him, and he said, I think the work I did with the Three Stooges. So that was really encouraging when he said that. So so I thought that some of the effects were kind of cheesy. I don't know. Maybe that's part of the charm of the movie, that it's sort of it's definitely not slick in that sense. In the days before CGI, but that was just kind of like, that was just it was what it was, and we tried to shoot them in a way that worked, that was reasonably believable, and yeah, I don't really have any regrets at all.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I got to tell you, like we mentioned earlier, the film was just amazing the way it is. So I'm not surprised at all that you don't have any regrets, because it really is such a good film. Speaking of actually the behind the scenes elements of it, Mick Strawn has a question for you. And his question,
Nick.
Yeah, he's got a
Wow.
question for you. And he actually asks, and this ties in a little bit earlier about the evolution of the films. He wants to know, how do you like the films as they evolved in the series?
I think my two favorites are probably, number one would be Wes's Nightmare, and my second favorite would be number 3. My feeling is I never thought one was a masterpiece. I know it's sort of a landmark film of the genre, and I think that it's a great concept, and Freddy was great, and there were a lot of really good things about it. But honestly, I didn't think it was that good of a film. I didn't think it was a great film. I mean, there were a lot of things that when I was watching it, I said, that could have been better.
Right.
And when it got to 3, I thought 3 had a really clever script. It was funnier. It was very witty, and it had a lot of stuff that was just kind of made me laugh, or kind of, surprised me. The production value was better. They had put more money into it. I mean, for God's sake, the script was written by Frank Darabont. 4, I thought, had a lot of good stuff in it, but there were, I don't know, I'm just not a big fan of Rennie Harlin's approach. And then I thought 5 and 6 really kind of just fell off for me. I thought 5 was kind of soulless, and 6 just, I don't know, it just seemed a little perfunctory to me. So then when I saw Wes's New Nightmare, I thought that was terrific, and I thought Wes really made a good film. That was a far better film than the original one. And I never saw any of the others. I mean, the Freddy Meets Jason, or the New Nightmare, or any of that stuff.
Oh, Paige, did you have something to say?
No, I was just gonna say. So with that, I know, haven't you done a few conventions?
I've done a few conventions. I actually avoided doing them for a long time. There was the 30th reunion, and I knew that everybody was going to be there, and I hadn't seen them. I mean, I had seen Clue, because I liked working with Clue so much that I hired him to do fairly good role in my next movie, The Hidden. But I hadn't seen Mark or Kim or any of those people since we finished the movie. So yeah, so I went, and did several conventions. It was really kind of a lot of fun.
Yeah, I was gonna say with that, the conventions and the fans and stuff. Like, what was it like to meet all the fans and see the outpouring of love for the franchise in general and for Nightmare 2? Did you know beforehand that there was such like a cult following of an appreciation, and not just, ooh, I'm a fan of the film, or did it surprise you when you were on the convention circuit?
It kind of surprised me. I mean, I will tell you that I think I've directed 15 films, and the top, I think I would put Elm Street at about number 5. It's in one way, it's my favorite film because it's made me the most money. I mean, it's the gift that keeps on giving, and it also basically gave me a career as a director. It opened up. It was the top film. On Monday, I got a call from Dino De Laurentiis, which I certainly wasn't expecting, and I realized that my life had now changed. So I'm fond of it for that reason. But I never thought of it as my best work. I didn't have a chance to have a lot of input into the script. It was pretty much, again, it definitely, there's a certain sense of humor, or a certain sensibility that I think represents me. So honestly, I never thought a lot about it. So it really was great to see how much people really loved the film and how much they appreciated it. And it was also really interesting to see Mark, and to see the way that a lot of fans just really adored Mark, and that he was very kind of meaningful for them. So yeah, I mean, that was great. And the reason that I wanted to be a filmmaker, it wasn't, oh, I'm going to make a lot of money, or I'm going to be able to boss people around, or I'm going to sleep with pretty girls, which I, unfortunately I never did on my movies. Wasn't my style. But but I wanted people to kind of feel the way I felt when I saw movies that I loved. I mean, I would see these movies and I would just walk out of the theater just feeling different than I did when I walked in, just feeling, emotion and whatever. And that was what I was trying to, that was what I was hoping people would get from my movie. So it was great to see that was actually happening.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing to see Nightmare 2 over the years, and I think the film itself is adored by a lot of really hardcore fans who really love the franchise, and I think for some people, even like when Paige mentioned earlier about the rules with Nightmare 2, I mean, it really didn't have any. People are kind of putting the rules on them now that were made after Nightmare 2. Yeah, that they came to be after Nightmare 2, and so it's just kind of unfair to put them on there. And I guess, the Nightmare franchise is filled with so many holes that it just doesn't make sense to put them on there. But Mark Patton over the years has really been such a, a voice for Nightmare 2, and he's really been a cheerleader for it. And I know that fans everywhere adore him, and myself included. He's just been a phenomenal human being, and it's great to see what is coming out of what he's been doing in the community around Nightmare 2.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that was one of the things that impressed me, because, I mean, honestly, I'm not the kind of person who goes onto the internet and Googles myself. I'm kind of afraid what I might find, so I kind of avoid doing that. And I knew that it seemed that everybody loved 1. I mean, people loved 2 enough so that it made more money than 2, and that everybody wanted to see 3. But I think once 3 came out, everybody said, "Wow, 3 is really good," and nobody really thought that 2 was that great, including me. So I never really thought about it very much. And really, it was just a few years ago that I kind of, when I sort of got in, onto Facebook, which I really did kind of a lot later than a lot of other people, and I sort of connected up with Mark and saw his kind of real fierce advocacy for the film, which kind of surprised me, and then to see people sort of reacting, and 30 years later, reevaluating it, and I mean, kind of, a new way of thinking about it. And, it was nice to have it validated. At the time that I made it, I thought it was a pretty good film. I thought I had done a good job with it. And I thought there were a lot of very good things about it. I thought there were some terrific sequences, and I thought, the acting was good, and it was kind of touching in a way, as well as being scary, as well as being funny. So, it was nice to get that validation.
As much as I love Mark Patton, I have to say it's so funny because they always talk about rules with Nightmare 2. The main star was a boy in this one, but I love that in the end it takes a woman to save the male still. So at the end there's still a female saving the day, and I roll on that one.
Well, I mean, one of the ways that it kind of broke a rule is it basically Jessie is kind of the girl role in the horror film. She's like the victim who's sort of put upon,
Mm-hmm.
and so that kind of broke a rule. I mean, I have to assume that Wes was good with that, because he I never heard that he objected to that. And obviously, he was getting ready to make the movie, so he must have bought into to that. But I mean, that was I, there were a lot of. I thought a lot about how to make the film, just how to get it done. How to design a sequence, and what the overall flow and the storytelling was. But I never really thought a whole lot about the underlying stuff that was going on. Like, I mean, there's all the talk about the gay theme, which honestly, if you heard anything, you'll know that it never occurred to me. It never occurred to any of the people at New Line. It may have occurred to David Chaskin, and I found out when I met with Mark that it definitely had occurred to him. I mean, he had this whole thing going on that I was completely unaware of. Like I said, I was just trying to make my days and get this complicated thing shot. But a lot of things that happen that really are kind of coherent and cohesive with one another. I mean, I think there's a lot of stuff that happens sort of in your subconscious, or stuff that you kind of feel but you don't really enunciate, and so I think that there was a lot of that going on with the film as far as I was concerned. Particularly with Mark Patton's character and his relationship with Kim's character.
I have a question here about The Hidden from Kevin, forgive me, Reitzel. He is wondering where the idea of the alien liking heavy metal came from.
Well, that was in the script. I mean, that was a project where I had a lot more time to work on the script. But the script the original script that I read by Jim Kauf was fantastic and brilliant. And part of the idea was that you have a good alien and a bad alien, and they're both learning what it means to be a human being. And the bad alien sort of picks up on hot women and loud rock and roll music and guns and all of that kind of stuff. So it was all in the script. I mean, the interesting thing is that we picked a lot of the music. I mean, I had an editor who had very good musical taste, and he had put a lot of temp music in. A lot of punk stuff and fairly heavy stuff, and most of it when it came time to actually pay for the rights, New Line didn't want to pay for this stuff because a lot of it was going to cost a lot of money, and they didn't want to spend it, so they ended up getting a lot of covers that frankly we were pretty disappointed with, but. When I watch it now, it doesn't bother me that much, except for a couple songs I think are a little bit lame, and particularly in comparison to the music that we had in. But yeah, that was always part of the concept. That was baked in with the script.
That's awesome. Do you think do you think that the A Nightmare on Elm Street films ended up going in a direction, thinking about it as a visionary, as a director? If you could have potentially created the rest of the Nightmare films, and even had a little bit more time to do so, would you have taken the storyline in a different direction, do you think?
I probably would have just kept going in the direction that we were already in, just because I don't think I had the imagination to see more than that. I mean, I thought that it really evolved in a really interesting way. I mean, I'm very proud to be part of that series because part of that franchise because I think of of all the ones where there were numerous sequels. If you think of Friday the 13th, that what's great about the Elm Street series is that each one is different. Each one had a different director, and each director brought his or her own sensibility to the film. So they weren't trying to make them all be the same. They were trying to within the framework of there's this guy called Freddy, and he appears in these teenagers' dreams in this small town, where there's Elm Street. Aside from that, people had a lot of leeway, and even the ones. I mean, like I thought that 5 struck me as very stiff and kind of intellectual, and not that I have anything against intellectuals, but it just wasn't that interesting for me. But I admired the fact that it took that approach. That was really felt pretty different in tone, particularly 3 and then 4 started to get really kind of slapstick, and then 5, I guess the best word for 5 is kind of austere. I mean, I don't know whether you would use that term, but that was kind of how I felt. But yeah, I mean, I think it went in ways that I never would have imagined, and I think that's what's so good about it.
I have 2 things to say. So the number 5 thing, we've talked about this a couple times on the show. We had Lisa Wilcox on the show last year, and with 5 is probably like the least receptive from the audiences. It's a very, like, I don't want to say smart film, but it's like a smart film for like horror. Yeah. And at that point, the genre had already moved past that. So I always say that, like, if 5's storyline would have happened after 2 or right after 3, it would have been more well received because it was still kind of in that dark thinking territory. But after 4, it was placed so horribly. But what I was going to say is Dream Warriors is my all-time favorite film of all time, not just horror film. But the one disservice that I wish that they wouldn't have done in Dream Warriors is somehow connected part 2 into it. There's no connection other than the house to part 2. And so a lot of fans, myself included, have theorized that in part 3, when the doctor says to Nancy, we lost a kid a couple months ago, he cut off his own eyelids. A lot of us say that that's unofficially Jesse, because we want so much for Jesse or something from part 2 to be in part 3 to connect it. Have you ever heard that theory, or what do you think of that theory? What do you think would have happened to Jesse after part 2?
Honestly, I never thought about it. I mean the way the movie ends, he's sort of back to normal. But I guess you would say that I would imagine that he'd have a very severe case of PTSD at the very least. But no, I never thought about it. I mean, the interesting thing, like with Mark and Elm Street, was that Elm Street was a really big deal in Mark's life. It might have been like, one of the central events in his life that really kind of determined the course of his life. After he did the movie, he quit acting, and he went off and it, completely changed the course of his life. And, he had been doing very well, and there were all sorts of things going on, and the whole shooting of the movie, he had a lot of trauma about shooting it, and realizing that there was this gay subtext, and he was a closeted gay at that point, and all of those things, none of which had ever occurred to me. I mean, I was just completely oblivious. I had no idea. I didn't even know he was gay. It never even occurred. I never even thought about it. I just, hey, I like this actor. He's vulnerable. He's doing a good job. He's a really good actor. End of the story. But I mean, for me, the movie came out. I worked my ass off. I think I did a good job with the elements that I had to work with, including the script and everything else. And as soon as the movie came out, bang, suddenly, everybody was interested in hiring me as a director, and I never looked back. So I never really thought about it. I mean, honestly, I don't go back and watch my movies. I'm about to do a screening of 1201, which is one of my favorites. And honestly, I don't think I've seen it since I made it. I'm looking forward to seeing it. So no, I never thought about that. I just, the film was done. It did its thing. I was happy with it. And I moved on.
I was sitting here thinking of a funny comment, back to The Hidden. Do you think that The Hidden and Kyle MacLachlan's role played any part in him getting cast in Twin Peaks as an FBI agent?
Well, I would like to think so, but David Lynch has such an original mind that for me to say that that he stole some ideas from my movie would be a little pretentious on my part. So I have no idea.
I know, but I had to ask.
Yeah.
It just made me think about it. So I've got one more question, unless Paige, you want to go ahead. Do you have anything that's burning in your mind?
I was going to say, I was going to say something along the lines of earlier, like, now knowing the fandom and really knowing stuff, where would you see Jesse today? Where would Jesse Walsh be today?
You mean as a 45-year-old man?
No, what do you think really truly happened to him after that? Do you think that he, in your interpretation, did he live? Did he die? Because we have that jump scare at the end with Freddy's paw coming out.
Was he in a mental institution?
Really
yeah.
Right.
Well, the jump scare at the end was basically New Line. I mean, we didn't really have an ending for the movie, and New Line wanted to end the thing, so there was a path to a sequel, that would kind of set up, no, Freddy's not really dead, and let's have a little scare. And so, there was all this powwowing, and I was kind of shooting the movie, and just, like I said, just trying to sort of get my days, or in the case of Elm Street, getting my getting through the night, and they'd say, hey, how about this ending, and they had like a brain trust who was trying to come up with a good ending. So I mean, the ending really was just, in terms of being thematic. I mean, it was the same thing with the ending for Elm Street 1, I mean, that was not the original ending. They insisted that Wes change the ending so that there was a possibility for a sequel. The fact is, with the horror film, it doesn't matter. Anybody who's dead can come back alive again, I mean,
especially when you're Freddy Krueger.
Yeah. I mean, so he's got what? Probably 9 lives at this point. He's probably come back 9.
He is eternal.
Yeah, but I mean, so the ending was just a way to put a little extra, little cherry on the top of the cake, and also to set up that Freddy could be back. I mean, the hope was that Freddy might be back, which he was. So, I mean, the more interesting thing is, Mark, who, the last time that I saw him, he was a 23-year-old very young man, and the next time I saw him, he's in his 40s, and he had a lot of stuff happen in his life, between that and it was really interesting to sort of get to know him, and actually hang out with him, which we didn't do. We just really had a working relationship, and he always kind of seemed a little out of sorts. And I never knew why, and I thought, maybe part of it's just because the character's kind of out of sorts, but I got some insight into a little more of what was going on with Mark at that time.
So speaking about that, because I know Mark is going to go into a lot of detail about what happened in Scream Queen, the documentary.
Right.
You're going to be in the documentary, correct? I know that you guys were filming some stuff. I shameless plug, Diandra and I got to film some fun stuff at one of the conventions with him.
Oh, cool.
And we got to hear like all sorts of stuff about it. And so you're going to be in the documentary, right? Is there anything, without revealing too much stuff, is there anything that you can say talking about that?
Well, I'm actually a little bit worried about it, to tell you the truth, because I got an email from Mark. He and I may be doing some appearances together, which would be fun. And I am doing conventions in case anybody out there is interested. I'm now interested in doing them. Particularly if there are other Elm Street. So Mark said, I said, so how is the documentary coming along? And he said, oh, it's done. And he said, you sort of come across, I'm not sure exactly what he said, but he said that I look good, but I sort of came across as crotchety, or words to that effect. My attitude toward Mark, because Mark, seemed to be pretty obsessed and traumatized with the whole thing. And my attitude was, okay, but move on with your life, And so when they interviewed me, because he had this question about Dave Chaskin and whether Dave Chaskin purposely put the gay subtext in and all of that kind of stuff, and he seemed very concerned about it. And I said, I don't think, I think it's time to move on. And so when they interviewed me, I think some of that came across. So if you're wrapped up in Mark's story, maybe I'm the guy who throws a little cold water on it. I don't know. I hope not, because I have 30 years after the fact, I have enormous respect for what Mark has become just as a human being. I think he's a great guy, and I think that he's doing a lot of really good stuff. So I have a lot of admiration for him. So I just hope that I don't come across that way.
Well, do you have, you said you were going to any conventions in the future. Do you have any that you can share with us that we might be able to keep an eye out for you?
I think there's one in November in New Jersey. I don't know if it's a Comic-Con or I don't know. It's a pretty big one. There's also a possibility that Mark and I might be doing an appearance and doing like a screening and a dinner somewhere around Philadelphia over sometime in June. I know somebody's trying to work that out where it would be a smaller group of people, like a screening for like 100 people, and then everybody would have it much more of a chance to interact with us. So, that sounds like fun. I mean, as you said about my reaction to going to these, like conventions. It really is great to see people that really appreciate the film, and that it really. Every time that somebody writes me on Facebook and tells me, how much, Elm Street or The Hidden or Alone in the Dark or some of my other movies have meant to them, it's really great. I'm very grateful to them. They feel like they're grateful to me for making it, but I'm really grateful to them for watching it. I mean, if nobody watches it, nobody cares about it, then it's kind of has sort of been for naught. So it's great to get that feedback. So yes, I hope to be meeting more fans. I don't do a lot of these things. I think people are much more interested in meeting the actors than they are in meeting the director anyway. But
absolutely not.
Yeah.
I'll be honest. Everybody, like, you will be a huge draw at conventions. Trust me. The actors are amazing, and everybody's so excited to meet them. But really, like, it's a lot of the crew members people get excited to meet over too. We Mick Strawn came to a convention for the first time last year at the Scarefest, and Diandra and I were very fortunate to like be there with him, and just to see him with the fans, it was insane, because you guys in a sense are very rare, and to a lot of the fandom, meeting the rare people, that's where they get excited and get thrilled. So you definitely are going to be exposed to a whole new world once you start doing conventions.
And I have to say that we've had a lot of people on the show, but I was nervous to talk to you because I very much value talking to directors. I know Paige is a director. I'm getting into being a director, and I really value talking to other directors that are out there. And so, being fans of Nightmare 2, I mean, this was so great to have you on, and this conversation is kind of coming full circle to where we started, of just being really thankful for you for taking the time to talk with us about Nightmare 2 and your career and what's going to be happening in the future.
Well, actually, I sort of stepped away from filmmaking about 13 years ago. I got an offer to start a film program from scratch at a university in North Carolina, and I took it. And so I did that for 13 years. I mean, I'm a person who never took a film course or film class in my life, and suddenly I was like creating a film program, and it was pretty interesting. I mean, I basically had to think about why I did all the things that I did instinctively, and now to figure out exactly what the reason was that I did it. So that was pretty interesting. So I left the university this summer, and I've got I'm working on a vampire film. There's a book, I don't know whether you've ever heard of a book called Carmilla. Carmilla was written by an Irishman by the name of Le Fanu. It was written 20 years before Dracula, and it's about the original book takes place, in the 19th century, and this young girl and her mother drive around in a carriage, and they stop by these castles, and they're kind of taken in. And the young girl, whose name is Carmilla, is a vampire, and she befriends the young girl who lives in the house and turns them into vampires. And almost every movie that you see where there's a female vampire, somewhere Carmilla is part of the DNA. And really good writer. I mean, really good writer. And we basically did a contemporary script that's very, very, very loosely based on it. And it's probably the best script that I've had in a long time, and I'm really excited. And I think we seem to have most of the financing in place, but you never quite know. But my hope is that I'm going to make it. I'm hoping I'll get to make at least one or two more films before I sort of fade away. So I'm really looking forward to it. I'm kind of wondering whether after 15 years away from making a film, how it'll turn out. But I'm very optimistic. I think it's going to be great. And I'm kind of just looking forward to reactivating that whole part of my life again.
Well, I know we can't wait to see it. That sounds like a great concept. And unfortunately, I haven't read the book yet, but heck, I would love to.
Well, don't but it actually, it's a lot about female empowerment and religious intolerance. And I mean, any good vampire movie is about a lot more than vampires, and that's very true with this. It sort of deals with a lot of really interesting stuff, and has just got some wonderful, wonderful scenes. It has just a great villain. I know I was up for doing a movie for one of the studios, and I really wanted to do it because it seemed like a fun project, but I wasn't in love with it. And the head of production said to me, "So Jack, is there a scene in the film that you just can't wait to do?" And honestly, there wasn't. So I had to sort of come up with one and act like I was really enthusiastic about it. Whereas with Elm Street or with The Hidden or with some of these other movies, there were just these sequences that I was just kind of nervous to do, but couldn't wait to see if I could actually pull them off. And that's exactly how I feel about a lot of stuff in this script. There are just these scenes that just make me just chuckle or rub my hands together, and I just can't wait to see if I can pull them off. So that's my hope.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on, Jack. It was great to talk to you and to kind of pick your brain a little bit.
Well, I have to say, I've been doing a lot of interviews and podcasts lately, and a lot of them are kind of the same old questions. And you both really, had a really interesting slant on this, and so it was really a lot of fun to talk to both of you. And I appreciate your insights and your enthusiasm. So thank you very much.
Aw, thanks.
Thank you.
That means a lot.
Thank you.
And good luck with your films.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So we're excited. We're actually making a documentary about A Nightmare on Elm Street currently.
Really?
Shocker.
Yeah, we're a shocker. It's called Fred Heads the Documentary, shameless plug, and it's all about the fandom of A Nightmare on Elm Street.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and a lot of our insight comes from just being in the community for so long and really getting to hear the fans' stories and their true love for these films, a lot of which Nightmare 2 is included in. So it's cool. We're really excited.
Well, please, send me a link or send me a copy when it's done. I'd love to see it.
Yeah, we'll send you some information on it so you can take a look.
Fantastic.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Jack, and
okay.
It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Likewise.